the companies that you're selling to are going to want to see that whatever way you've enacted AI is not going to put their data at risk. That's really important because nowadays data is almost as valuable, if not more valuable, than the actual products that we sell to people. And that has a lot of implications. And so how do you show and prove to people that you are secure and that you're handling it securely?
That's an interesting assertion that the data that we handle could be more valuable than the actual products that we're producing, shipping, transporting, and selling. I'm absolutely flummoxed by that. Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, we'll dive into one of the most critical issues shaping modern supply chains, cybersecurity. With global logistics becoming more interconnected and digitally dependent, protecting data, operations, and infrastructure from cyber threats is no longer optional. It's mission critical. Joining us is the CEO of Secure Cloud Innovations, Caleb Mattingly, who's going to share his insights on evolving risks, compliance pressures, and strategies to build resilience in supply chain and logistics networks. Welcome, Caleb.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Really excited to be on the show today.
I'm excited to get to our conversation because I don't know of anyone who hasn't experienced some sort of hiccup or disruption with cybersecurity. So I'm sure that there is going to be something for everyone in this conversation. But before we get started, let's get to know you a little bit better. So our icebreaker for today is, what is the worst style or fashion trend you ever embraced?
It's a good and fairly weighted question here. But in high school, actually, I embraced the whole Fancy Friday trend that kind of was going around. I don't know where I saw it, probably on like Instagram or something at the time, but ended up dressing in a suit just about every Friday of my junior and senior years.
Oh my goodness. And how did that work out for your social standing in high school? Because high school can be a cruel place.
Well, let's just say I didn't get any additional dates from doing that.
Did anyone accuse you of like being part of the debate team or going on a job interview or anything like that?
No, I went to a pretty country-esque school, so there was no debate team, and all the future farmers of America knew that I was not part of it. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Well, those jackets are very distinguishable. So like you would know if you saw the future farmers walking around in their jackets. It's not just regular formal wear. We have something similar. We do Workwear Wednesdays here at the office, where most of the time we're pretty casual, but on Wednesdays we all get dressed up, and it's just the most random thing in the middle of the week. I would say the worst fashion style. Now I'm a child of the 80s. So I had like the crazy bangs in high school, the permed hair, all of those. I think, though, the craziest one that I did was, for a while, I really enjoyed, I want to say it was in junior high. Junior high is a terrible time for kids. It's just the worst period of anyone's life. No one, I think, has a great time in junior high, but I was trying some different fashions then, and It was in the early 90s, and I want to say that dressing in men's clothes, like men's shirts and like a mini skirt and like that fashion, I really took to that one, and I don't know why. It was really bad. Oh, wow. Goodness. You know what? I'm glad that those days are over. I don't think anyone could pay me enough money to go back to junior high or high school and have to deal with other people judging you on your appearance like that. It's crazy, crazy, crazy.
It's true. Totally agree.
So the crazy thing we're talking about today, though, is cybersecurity. And it feels like not a day goes by when we don't hear of something else in the news, some other breach, some other data leak. And so in your view, what are some of the biggest risks facing our industry? So the supply chain, logistics, what risks are we facing today? And what's different from even something, I can't believe COVID was 5 years ago, but even something since COVID that we've had to, change and adapt the way that we approach cybersecurity?
Yeah, great question. Logistics is always seen as kind of a separate business entity than operations and other pieces of businesses, right? Um, but functionally, from a cybersecurity standpoint, there can be just as many risks in logistics as in any other part of the business. Um, and I think one of the biggest overlooked pieces of that, especially by people that end up being in cybersecurity within like information technology as opposed to operational technology, and I can speak to the difference there in a second, but is lack of connectivity. So I was actually just talking with a friend of mine. He's part of a full service solution for a logistics company, um, or by a logistics company. And what they ended up doing is they created a satellite based tracking system for shipments and specifically identifying when those cargo containers were opened or closed. So the what this was crazy because I had no idea about this until talking with him, but apparently, people will wait until tractor trailers are out in the middle of like the desert, right? And then they will go and essentially like break into the tractor trailer as it's on this highway when it loses connection with the internet or like with cellular service networks, and then steal whatever's in there. I think that happened with like a lot of PlayStations actually recently, PlayStation 5s, and so in doing so, like when they lose internet connection and they lose like cell service, the driver can't call for help, right? Can't call law enforcement for help. And it creates a window of opportunity. And people think like cybersecurity is very focused on just like being on a computer and typing on a keyboard and somebody screaming out, I'm in, but like the reality is that it also deals with these situations that are in the physical world, right? Where connectivity and interconnectivity is so important for securing a variety of things. And in this case, it's transportation vehicles and what they are transporting. And so what I've found very interesting is a lot of companies haven't been thinking about that as much, and especially within the logistics space and specifically around stealing. And that happens across the board, right? Like in IT, we call it insider threat, right? You have like insider trading that occurs, or you have someone that goes in and maliciously makes changes to your application or your infrastructure and stuff. Well, in logistics, it ends up being something very similar where you could have an insider threat of someone that is acting nefariously, right, or acting as a bad actor, and not a bad actor like how Nicolas Cage gets his reputation and stuff, but like a bad actor and someone that is doing something bad. And they go in and they find where is the hole, like where is the point where there is no connectivity, or where's the point where we can take something and no one finds out, right? Or change inputs in the database, right? So that instead of showing 101 in this case PlayStations, there's only 100 that are in the box, and so I get to steal this one and no one knows, right? Like that's a significant part of logistics and just retail in general, right? Of bad data input, or people acting and putting in false information. So,
well, and you mentioned something about the difference between information technology and operational technology. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, so information technology typically deals with your computers, your servers. It's the things that harness and have information, whereas operational technology is, as you would probably imply, stuff that is being operated or like in the physical world is in operation. So an example of this is actually your HVAC system. So your HVAC system is an operational technology that, crazy enough, could be hacked. And there's a ton of examples, and I think one of the most famous and kind of funniest examples, although it still has weight, is a casino that was hacked because someone broke into the fish tank monitor that was connected to the internet and was able to steal millions of dollars through that spot. So yeah, that'll probably be the best example of an operational technology being taken advantage of.
Well, and we laugh because that sounds so absurd to use the fish tank monitor in order to enable the theft of millions of dollars. It sounds like some sort of, crazy story that would be the next Ocean's 11. But when you think about all of the different operational technologies that facilities have within their production, within their warehousing and distribution networks, that's a significant amount of risk and, potential for an in if someone wanted to do something nefarious, if someone wanted to disrupt their business. So why do you think supply chain or logistics is of interest to any of these individuals? Are they doing it for that personal gain of, perhaps, stealing product, or are they doing it to try to disrupt individual businesses? What types of things do you see?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it depends on the reason behind the attack. And I know that kind of is what your question is. However, as an example, right, a couple years ago, actually, when the whole political situation with Israel and Palestine started taking off, there's actually a brewery that was utilizing um, some brewing equipment that was internet connected and was associated with an Israeli company. And the hackers actually attacked that equipment, turned off all the taps in the brewery because of that. And then essentially when people logged in, they would see stuff that was very anti-Israel on the pieces that they're hacking into. And so it's very interesting because that was politically motivated, right? To be able to say like we just are anti this and that's that. Whereas you have other people that are breaking into things to potentially like steal company information. I mean, I'm sure that there are people out there that are trying to get, Coca-Cola's secret ingredient or Pepsi's and, and everything. And those people are trying to do it for an entirely different reason than the group that was hacking this brewery, right? So it really depends on the attacking group or person in a lot of those cases. But with logistics in particular, I think one of the reasons why it ends up being such a big target for cyber security or cyber attackers is because of the fact that logistics is very often overlooked, and your supply chain specifically is overlooked. And more recently, it's coming to light that like we can't be doing that. But your supply chain also consists of all the vendors that are in that list, right? Like Target actually several years ago had a huge hack that occurred. And it ended up being that one of the contractors that they were using actually was the one that brought the virus and brought like all of that exploit into their network and their system. It wasn't a Target employee. Target had like really good practices in place, or decent practices in place. I guess if they were really good, it wouldn't have happened, right? But there was an oversight, right, on the full supply chain implications of we're using these vendors. They don't have to go through any kind of rigorous security process. So we just accept what they say that they're doing, and that's that. And that ended up being kind of an advent for why we have so many frameworks now that state requirements that you have to meet in order to do business with enterprises like Target or Walmart or, Fortune 500 companies.
That really leads into my next question and point, and that's, what are some of those regulations that are being enacted, and what are some of those guideposts that are being set in order to say, okay, you need to be checking upstream and downstream with your suppliers and your vendors and understanding what their security measures are? Is anything changing from that legal perspective where there is at least maybe a shift in accountability?
The International Standards Organization, or ISO, publishes a ton of different frameworks, we could say. The most common that we deal with is 27001, and that deals with information security management systems. But they have a ton, and I'm sure that organizations that are out there that do consumer products and stuff, or building consumer products, deal with a lot of the QA ISO certificate or standards. But there are several that actually pertain to using information security systems or information management systems, and then also AI. So there's a new one that actually came out recently called ISO 42001, and that deals with your AI management system. And that one's going to become a lot more prominent nowadays because most people don't know how to secure AI. And I think from logistics companies and other companies involved in supply chain all the way to your traditional IT companies, everybody's kind of figuring out how do we utilize AI in our processes, right, to make things more efficient, to stop having so many bottlenecks in the process of creating either documentation or responses or whatever it is, right? Or processing documentation. And so as we continue to move and progress in implementing AI across the business functions, I think that specific standard is going to become more and more prominent across all of the different types of companies and sectors within business that we see on a day to day, especially in the supply chain. Because your vendors that you're the companies that you're selling to, right? Like as a vendor in logistics, the companies that you're selling to are going to want to see that whatever way you've enacted AI is not going to put their data at risk, right? And that's really important because nowadays data is almost as valuable, if not more valuable, than the actual products that we sell to people. And that has a lot of implications. And so how do you show and prove to people that you are secure and that you're handling it securely?
That's an interesting assertion that the data that we handle could be more valuable than the actual products that we're producing, shipping, transporting, and selling in stores. I'm absolutely flummoxed by that. So what kind of data are they typically looking for in order to try to cause a disruption when you find those cases?
I mean, it could really be a variety of things.
I'm sure.
It could be anything military-esque data, like knowing that, hey, we don't know exactly where this plane is flying that holds this important person, but we do know that this airport was shut down for this period of time. We know that this airport was shut down for this period of time. And we know that a flight, came in and left those two airports. Like that data can be critical to someone in like a military perspective. But from more of a commercial space or commercial side perspective, like the data of how much your contracts are worth can be very important, right? Like someone knows how much you're bidding, then they can essentially underbid you. And that can be a very heavy consequences if someone gets access to your financial data. But there's a lot of different types of data and ways that they could correlate between different data points to draw conclusions that, maybe you don't have that directly in your spreadsheet, but by taking two different spreadsheets and analyzing them together and seeing the overlaps, you can draw necessary conclusions to get data that you wouldn't otherwise have. So
Yeah. I'm sorry. I laughed at that when you said it, but my immediate thought was one of the end scenes of A Few Good Men, where they're trying to prove that a flight took place and they have these logbooks and they can't prove it. It's a misdirection in the end. But, to that point, there's all kinds of information that we now have digitized that, we have in even in the past, 50 years, we haven't had this volume of data just available for someone to access. It's all been, much more siloed, much more protected, when things are not connected to the internet, and now everything is connected to the internet. And so therefore the data can be accessed if someone is, diligent enough or tenacious enough to keep trying to find a way in.
well, and I can also say something else that's very interesting. About in 2019, I worked with a industrial control system cybersecurity company, and we were looking for ways to try to get data like that, right? Like how would an attacker come up with these things? Like you got to kind of think like the attacker in order to defend against
Yes.
the attacker. And one of the things that we came up with is temperature fluctuations in a room when someone walks in. So like you actually get a slight temperature fluctuation when someone comes in or leaves a room, right? So like based on that, you can actually identify how many people are in the room versus not in the room and things like that. It was very interesting. But there's a lot of implications when you start taking a ton of data points, right? And you aggregate them all together and you can see where they overlap, like I was saying, and then you can draw conclusions that you wouldn't necessarily have had.
So when there is a cyber breach and it affects something in the supply chain, whether it's a supplier or a vendor or carrier, um, when it goes through the entire supply chain and affects those multiple organizations, like you were mentioning with the Target, and it was just a contractor that they were using. What strategies help companies build the resilience against those types of disruptions? Is it just a matter of having more policies in place to say, hey, you have to be able to demonstrate your security measures and at least, have everybody's T's dotted and I's crossed, so that everybody has their own scope of responsibility? Or is more interaction and more collaboration needed between individuals or companies or groups within those chains in order to make this a robust solution that's going to truly protect the data?
I typically tell companies kind of tongue in cheek that a lot of the compliance frameworks end up being sort of like pyramid schemey, in the sense that when you first take on like SOC 2 or ISO or whatever, a lot of times the advice that's given, and it's not a mandated requirement, but it's pretty heavily advised, is to have all of your vendors then become compliant, or only do business with vendors that are compliant with SOC 2 or so and such. And while it is somewhat of a joke, and people typically laugh and stuff when I bring that up, it's not a bad practice in and of itself, because it sets a baseline for who you're doing business with and how they're handling data. And can they lie about it? Yes. Anybody can lie about like what they're doing. And, from a business standpoint, vendors lie all the time and say like, hey, we do this thing, and then they don't, right? Or it's on the roadmap and it's not on the roadmap. But the reality is that you need something that someone signs off on and says, baseline wise, we have this in place and this is good. What we have found in doing business with organizations is they need something. And on top of having this like framework in place, you have to have cybersecurity insurance nowadays. Like, you have to. It doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter what kind of business you're in. Cybersecurity insurance is mandatory. If you have anything that touches the internet, including a fish tank, you need cybersecurity insurance in order to, you do. I mean, it's true, in order to do that. And a lot of people overlook that. Heck, a lot of businesses overlook general liability insurance. And please don't do that. If you're listening to this right now, please make sure that you have general liability insurance, but also make sure that you have cybersecurity insurance, because that can make or break your business. Like that, it's so important. And I think also, just a tidbit, as like somebody that works with a lot of different types of companies, and specifically companies that are sometimes outside the norm of who you would think needs cybersecurity, make sure that you have backups. Mm-hmm. Like, make sure that you have backups of data.
Data backups, yes.
Ellen, we were just talking, right? Like, about your data can be almost more important potentially than even the products that you're pushing. Make sure that you have backups of that data. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you were talking about certifications. We're talking about insurance. How do businesses make the business case for these investments in logistics and supply chain, which, as you've already said, is often overlooked? So what does it take in order to get these stakeholders aligned and bought in to the idea that this information or this aspect of their business is open to threat?
Like, how do you make someone aware that they are exposed in some manner?
Yeah. What is it that helps change their mind? What is it that opens their eyes to understand what the risk is, what the mitigation is if a risk goes unprotected and there is a breach? Balancing those costs of, yes, it's going to cost money to have cybersecurity insurance. Yes, it's going to cost money to go through the process of being certified in this or that or the other standard. Why should they do that when they're looking at it and saying it's just easier to write off that truckload of product? It's not that big a deal. in the scheme of things, that's, a handful of product compared to their larger portfolio.
That's a good question, and another good question. You've had a lot of good questions, Ellen. I think there's a couple different questions actually embedded in that, and I'll speak.
Yeah, there was. That was a whole little monologue.
I'll speak to the last one first. I would not advocate for spending more money on a solution to deter a problem, like a risk, than the risk itself would incur if it is realized. So, like in cybersecurity and anytime like you're looking at risk, you need to do a cost analysis, right? Like if this risk is realized, what is the problem? And like if it's, hey, once a year we lose a whole shipment's worth of whatever it is that we're pushing, because of theft or because of something cybersecurity related. But then, and that shipment is worth, I don't know, let's just say $200,000, right? But if I'm going to pay insurance, it's going to cost me $300,000 a year in order to have the insurance. Then it doesn't make sense, right? Like that doesn't make sense to have. That's a very it's a tough way of looking at it because, to an extent you want to have insurance, right? You want to have like these things in place, these deterrences, but at the same time, you don't want to spend more for them than if you actually have the risk occur. So the attack occur, the problem occur. So that's I think that was the final question that you asked, is how do they determine that. In regards to the rest of it, like how do you get buy-in, right? Like how do you get buy-in on this? Let's just say that it's $50,000 for the insurance for the year. I have no idea what anybody, generally speaking's cybersecurity insurance would be.
It will truly depend on what their business does and how big the risks are. I mean, the insurance adjusters know how to tweak their own numbers.
And I'm throwing out numbers that are way bigger than what we pay, and so it's like, but just for the sake of argument, like let's just say it's 50,000, and for them to lose a shipment of worth of supplies or product in the year would be still about $200,000. Well, I think at that point it's pretty easy to get buy-in because you have numbers there. I think generally speaking, businesses and business leaders are willing to put forth the effort and to show. Actually, I would go so far as to say in logistics and in supply chain, it's a lot easier to get buy-in than in most other organizations. When you have a software product and you're trying to pitch like, hey, we need to have this new security tool in place because X, Y, and Z could happen, you're kind of guessing as to how much fallout is going to be there, right? Like how much, like the monetary impact, that risk being realized.
Yeah.
Whereas in logistics, and especially in more consumer goods types of industries, you have a direct, like 100%, we know how much this stuff was worth and how much it was going to sell for, and you're able to like flatline, like, hey, this is how much it cost to make it, this is how much we were going to sell for, this is how much we would have made, and now we've lost all of that, and here's the way that we would fix the problem, right? And this is how much it costs, this is how much this costs, and if it's higher or lower, you can make your decision based off of that. But going to someone and showing them like, hey, if we get this compliance framework in place, Target will do business with us, and that's an additional $2 million a year that we get, and to get it in place is going to cost us, I don't know, 50 grand or 100 grand a year. It's obvious that someone's going to go forward with that, right? Spend 100 grand to make $1 million, right? Yeah,
that's a no-brainer.
Exactly. And that's one of the best parts about working in logistics and supply chain, is that you are able to show, oftentimes, not every time, and I'm not going to make a broad sweeping, generalization, but oftentimes you're able to show a direct business impact and direct monetary impact on the business, for the risk itself and the deterrent. So.
And I know you were talking about AI earlier, and which is a whole other topic in and of itself. But one thing that we tend to see a lot of happening in facilities now is greater automation. I was talking about it just a couple of weeks ago on the podcast with someone else, and we were talking about, labor and how, robotics is taking over a lot of just function in a lot of these warehouses, in a lot of these production facilities, just because labor is so hard to come by. There are people who don't want these jobs. So we now have machines doing these, and these machines are connected. They're connected to a computer that's telling them what to do. And that is yet another risk. So as companies are increasing automation, increasing their reliance on, computer run programs, whether it's a robot, whether it's, their WMS or their ERP system, all of that data is being passed back and forth between multiple systems all throughout the hours of the day. What other threats should they be looking for in order to make that threat assessment, that risk assessment, in order to, justify the cost or even understand what the risk is?
In those cases where you have, your business network, which has all of your IT stuff on it, and then more of your operational network, we'll call it, with all the OT on it, there needs to be very clear lines between the two. That's incredibly important. Those robots, the computers that those are hooked up to, and that whole network should not be able to directly talk to your business network with all the finances and all of that. That's a no, right? That's bad. And then
some silos are good.
Some silos are good. And in the defense world, there's a lot of air gapping that happens. And I believe that happens in some cases in like the manufacturing world as well, where you're completely siloed from the internet and you have to essentially bring things from one place onto that network, like from one network to another network, right? And keeping them completely logically separated. When you have either of those two cases, whatever touches your operational network needs to be following some kind of standard. And in that case, it's typically around your contractors that you need to be very cautious, right? And one of the things that is really interesting, and I've thought about a lot lately, is how tax law actually is somewhat unhelpful in cybersecurity, and it's specifically because so when you have a 1099 contractor, you're not allowed to give them a computer. If you furnish any kind of equipment to them, then they become a W-2. However, if you have contractors that are coming onto your network, and then you have to essentially be okay with how their business runs, like their computers and their mobile device management and all of that. Whereas I think it would make a lot more sense if we were able to give computers, to these people that are contractors that are coming from another company, and being like, hey, when you're working with our systems, you use our systems, right? And you use our security standards. But I would be curious to see if that ever changes. I'd be interested in seeing if we can make a business case for that to be changed.
That would be an interesting change, to have cybersecurity change tax law.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure crazier things have happened, but I don't know. I think we'll have to get your podcast, Ellen, in front of some politicians or something in order to get some progress there.
I don't know. I don't know. That sounds like a daunting prospect. So you just said there's some crazy situations. What is the craziest cybersecurity attack you've ever personally dealt with? Besides the fishbowl. I mean, that was just the news.
Well, okay. So craziest cybersecurity attack we've ever dealt with is we had a company that was like an ed tech company, and they essentially help teach languages to kids. And someone previous to us coming on and working with them had created it was actually a little creepy, but they found out the CEO's husband's name and then made an account on the EC2 instance, like the server itself, under his name, and then started changing all of the different links to point to like Indonesian casinos and stuff like that. It was really odd. Very interesting. It was an easy cleanup, so that was good. Lots of backups were taken, and that's what I was saying though. Is like you really want backups, right? So then you know, like, okay, we can see when something changed and when an attack occurred, and we can revert back before that. But that was pretty odd, and it wasn't odd because of like the redirects. It was odd because they went through such a rigmarole to find out personal information, right? Like, and then leveraging that in the attack. It was a little creepy, but um, yeah, that was probably the craziest.
Yeah, that sounds like it has a note of personal to it.
Yeah, it did. It did feel that way a little bit. It was yeah, odd. But favorite story would definitely be Stuxnet, which I think still kind of applies here. And that was almost 20 years ago now, I think, but maybe 15. And essentially, Iran had their, nuclear facilities that were processing uranium and everything. And someone decided to hack into that through a consultant, through a contracting company, because they were leveraging portable drives. So like the little
The USB
drives and
sticks.
everything. Yeah. So they were leveraging that, and so they hacked the contracting company. The contracting company had a drive. It was a super sophisticated attack. But they pulled the drive out and then like took it into this facility, plugged it in to do their work and everything. Ended up being that drive installed a worm inside of the nuclear processing plant, and then in that process degraded the fans or something along those lines. I'm blanking
Okay, yeah.
full all the terminology
Details.
for the story. Yeah, the details for the story, but essentially it ended up causing it to get to the point where it could reach critical mass and everything. It was wild. But that process and that story was crazy, and thinking about how cybersecurity and how the supply chain plays such a huge role in even our nation's infrastructure, right? Like, because that stuff is happening out in the world right now, and it's like, how do we protect against that? And we have to be thinking about that in a consistent manner. So
Yeah, no, and I remember that story that you mentioned about Iran, because when at that time I was working for HSBC Bank, and I remember the memo that came out that said no unauthorized USB drives, and you had to check your computer. Now this is when we still had desktops, so you had to check your computer and every possible port before you turned it on each morning. It was like a new policy that we had to do in order to check that someone wasn't, plugging in a keystroke logger or anything like that into your computer in order to get access. And I mean, that was at the time, it was a huge deal. And, the idea that someone could just plug in this little stick and it would record every single keystroke you did for that day. And then they could then, to your point, deconstruct it, figure out what you did, when you logged into something, what that username was, what the next string of characters, that was your password. And then they had access to all of your information just because they plugged in a USB stick. And even to this day, there are a lot of clients when I go to a trade show or anything like that, and I have USB sticks that are branded, here's a nice memory stick for you. Oh, sorry, our company doesn't allow us to use promotional sticks that we get from some unauthorized, unknown individual. And I mean, that's 20 years old and still a practice to this day in a lot of different organizations, and not without precedent, clearly.
yeah, I mean, there's this whole social engineering attack that you can do. Especially like the good guys come up with cool ideas and then publish them. Who knows what all the bad guys are trying and stuff, but the good guys will publish this stuff. And one of my favorites that I read about is you put a bunch of essentially malware onto these sticks, right? And then you go out into the parking lot of the business that you want to work in, and you just drop a couple on the ground. Yeah, and then people take them and they take them home, or they take them in the office and they go, I wonder what's on this, and they plug it in, and then bam, you got access. Like it's wild. But also, I personally love learning about this stuff because it's amazing to think of like how creative these people are, right, coming up with this, and then how creative we have to be as defenders to try to fight against it.
Exactly. If only we could harness that negative creativity for a more positive use.
Sure. That's true.
Well, thank you so much, Caleb, for sharing your perspective with our audience today.
Yeah, of course. It was awesome being on the podcast with you, Ellen. You're a great host.
Thank you. As we heard today, cybersecurity is no longer just a technical safeguard. It's foundational to supply chain resilience and business continuity. Companies that recognize this will be the ones positioned to lead in the years ahead. To our listeners, if you found today's episode valuable, be sure to like and follow Speaking in Supply Chain wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio. And be sure to tune in next time.